1993's Best of the Best 2 is quite the departure from the squeaky clean sports action movie that preceded it. In fact, it's such a departure that I really struggle with whether to review this in scale against the original movie, or whether to just review it as a generic action film. There was a lot of feeling out to be had with this one, and it's more of a minefield production when compared to the original. The film picks up about a year or two after the events of the first film's ending, and half the cast have literally just fucking disappeared. And when I say disappeared, I mean this film pretty much pretends that they never existed. Virgil, Sonny, and Coach aren't even mentioned once in this film, and strong connections to the first film are limited to a quick catch-up montage of the events of the end of the first film in the opening titles, and the return of Dae Han, one of the baddies in the first film who's now playing a goodie. Seriously, you could just jump straight into this film without having seen the first, and you wouldn't really be missing anything. Anyway, for this outing, we pretty much solely follow the story of Alex, Tommy, and Travis. After winning at the Olympics, they used their newfound cred and the money they made from their endeavour to open a martial arts centre where they work to train the next generation of black belts. Alex's kid is now a couple of years older and is trying to follow in his father's footsteps of becoming a martial arts master. He's training for his black belt, and seemingly things are going pretty well. It's at this point, however, that our shady, villainous organisation enters the frame in the form of the Colosseum, a secret underground fighting and gambling enterprise run in the basement of a prominent nightclub. The rules of the Colosseum are simple. A challenger must fight 3 highly trained gladiators, each specialising in their own field of fighting. Each gladiator the challenger defeats lands them a cash prize, and if they manage to defeat the 3 gladiators, they're given the chance to take on the ultimate champion. Basically an end boss style super strong fighter who's previously beaten the 3 gladiators and the previous ultimate champion. If the challenger loses against the ultimate champion, then the crowd get to vote as to whether the challenger lives or dies. If the champion's beaten by the challenger, then the same rules apply, but the challenger then becomes the new ultimate champion and gains control of the Colosseum, effectively having control over which gladiators perform, taking on new challengers, and getting a hefty slice of the profits from all the gambling being done on the fights. Naturally, one of the 3 of them, Travis, the racist, sexist arsehole from the first film, reckons himself best of the best, so he inevitably goes to try his luck. And he does manage to beat the 3 gladiators and get to the ultimate champion, Brachus. This then sets in motion the main thrust of this film's plot. You see, Walter, Alex's kid, fails to achieve his black belt, but he takes it honourably, and Alex tells him that because he acted so maturely in his eyes, he's a man now. Walter takes this to heart and uses it as leverage to cancel his babysitter for the night, something Alex is very much against. So, he arranges for Travis to keep an eye on Walter. Unfortunately, due to Travis actually getting to the Ultimate Champion stage of the Colosseum, he turns up at Alex's house on the night he's supposed to be looking after Walter to cancel. Walter begs Travis to let him hang out with him, and after some umming and ahhing, he eventually relents and takes Walter to the illegal underground fight club. And wouldn't you know it, Brachus is a total machine. He pretty much destroys Travis in less than 5 minutes before snapping his neck and leaving him for dead. Walter sees all this and flees the club, eventually making it back home, where he tells Alex and Tommy what happened. Naturally, the pair head down to the club to find out exactly what's going on. But the host of the Colosseum stops them at the doors and basically tells them that Travis is fine and that he walked out of the building on his own 2 feet with a couple of girls. Both Tommy and Alex relax a bit on hearing that news and think that Walter's maybe just misunderstood the situation or being a little shit. So, they ruffle his hair and head home for the night. But the next day, Travis's body and car are found in a nearby river, with the scene being way too coincidental to look like an accident. Tommy and Alex somehow end up at the crime scene while they're literally pulling the car and body out of the river, and they immediately know that Walter wasn't making things up. So, they go back to the club, and when they still don't get the answers they want, they promptly beat the shit out of everyone and anyone in the place before smashing the place up. As you do. The pair leave the club quite upset, but the owners of the club make a note of the pair's license plate and begin to monitor them. After Travis's funeral a few days later, Alex begins to try everything in his power to get Travis's death explored further, which creates tension between himself and his wife, who's a journalist. Things seem quite bleak, and they're only going to get worse, as Walter's chased by goons while on his way home, and after just about being able to make it home, him and his dad pack quickly and try to leave but are caught by assassins, who unload a few tons of lead into the house. Luckily, the pair manage to escape, and with the help of Tommy, they're able to lie low at Tommy's grandparents' house while they figure out a way to get a resolution while also avoiding being whacked. In a final act where Tommy meets a ghost from his past who he must resolve with in order to move forward, Walter learns when to hold them and when to fold them, and Alex just sort of exists in this film. Will the gang manage to beat Baracus and avenge their friend? Or will what's left of the best wind up as the quick and the dead? I had a bit of a difficult time reading this film, honestly. With the previous entry, I found that, while it was maybe a bit inconsistent with its pacing and the three-act structure, at least it had those elements. Here it feels almost like the jump in tone away from a feel-good sports drama flick to something a bit more martial arts action-oriented has dramatically shifted the structure of the series, and I'm still not 100% sure if that's for the better. For starters, the script here, while entertaining, really doesn't feel fully formed. It kind of feels like they got a table pitch agreed and then started writing the script as they went along. The lack of almost any kind of meaningful ties to the first film was a real downer, because it kind of felt almost like this was a reboot of the franchise rather than a continuation of the story. The main plot points of this picture aren't that much different from any other of the action martial arts movies being made around this time. But the problem is, by 1993, the murder-vengeance type narrative within the action martial arts genre was really on its last legs, and watching it here, while it's handled in a fun way, it's also kind of meh in terms of its actual execution. Like, there isn't really a whole lot going on here outside of Travis got murdered by some bad guys and we got to train up to fight the bad guys. The three-act structure is kind of sloppily implemented as well, and it isn't really helped by the intermittent, bloated amounts of padding shoved in here left, right and centre. Personally, I'd have made the first act Travis's demise, the second act Tommy and Alex heading into the desert to lie low and train up, and then the third act the big finale. But instead, the first act is way over-bloated with trying to establish what the gang are up to, introducing Walter as a key element for some reason. He literally does nothing other than telling Tommy and Alex that Travis has been murdered, and then getting into Travis's murder. And that eats up about 40 minutes of the roughly 90-minute runtime. About 30 minutes is given up to Tommy and Alex training and having a seriously bi-coded supportive relationship with each other, and the final 20 minutes is just a super rushed finale that kind of feels unsatisfying. And that dissatisfaction is the rot that I keep having to come back to with this movie. There are just elements that really don't work in this script. The part of my brain that likes stunts and explosions keeps whooping at this with sheer joy, but the film critic side of my brain is staring aghast in pain. It's questions like, what's the point of Eric Roberts in this movie? Seriously, Alex does absolutely nothing in this film. A quick breakdown for reference: he doesn't help his son get a black belt, he doesn't stop the assassins from covering up Travis's death, he only briefly manages to stop assassins from trying to kill him and his son before Tommy turns up and saves the day, and he doesn't have any involvement in the final act's main point other than a bizarre subplot where he and Han stealth their way into the Colosseum to see the final showdown happen. And even then, they don't actually do anything once they're in there, they just sort of run around a bit. If anything, the film goes out of its way to make Alex a little bit unlikable. There's a moment around the second act of the film where he goes to his wife's work and basically asks her to run an investigative journalist piece on the murder of Travis to see what can be turned up. She refuses because she's not that kind of journalist, first and foremost, but also because the network she's on doesn't cover that kind of news. and he absolutely loses his shit at her for having the audacity to not want to get fired or to put time into a story that won't run. The rest of the film could be best summed up as him giving Tommy and Walter mentoring advice here and there, and largely just reiterating plot points. He has a couple of fight scenes, but even they're not all that great. Travis's death is also super undercut. They had the opportunity to kind of develop the character on a little bit from the end of the first film. By the end of the previous movie, he was still a bit of a douche, but there was a general sense that he'd grown a little bit as a person. Not by much, but it's a start. They could have maybe expanded on that a little bit and made him a slightly more understanding and likeable person. But no, instead they pretty much hit the reset button on his character and he's back to grabbing any girl he can and being as obnoxious as possible. And I think the biggest loss this film had was not killing him right away in the opening. He dies about 2/3 into the first act, which means the film sets him up just enough to raise interest in seeing where his character's going, at which point they bump him off, which makes the first third of the opening act feel a bit redundant, and it also cheapens his death as, while it is the catalyst for the majority of the film, it's never really explored further than Travis was our best friend, and that's about it. And honestly, Travis wasn't their best friend. Travis was a racist, sexist arsehole who, over the course of the first movie, managed to advance from scourge of humanity to, I'll let him come to my house, but he's sitting in the back garden and we're only giving him the cheap beer in terms of respectability. And the final element that kind of irks me about this script is the power level of all of the fighters involved. It's all over the shop, quite frankly, and the plot convenience fairy is working overtime to ensure that the right results happen exactly as required. An example being that it takes Travis a significant period of time to dispatch his gladiator challenges, and then his fight with Brachus is pretty short and results in a few bruises for Brachus and Travis being dead. Tommy, by contrast, dispatches all the gladiators he's challenged with. He has more challenges than Travis did, and in the same time it took Travis to beat one of them, and spoilers from here on out, Tommy beats the 3 gladiators and ends his fight with Brachus. Travis and Tommy were on the same Olympic fighting team, and I know that everyone's different, but the idea that Tommy so outweighed Travis, his literal peer, to the extent that Tommy could win an entire tournament in the time it took Travis to fight 2 people, is just absurd. Equally, the goons' power levels are just all over the place. One minute they're being thrown around like ragdolls, other moments they're like the Terminator. It's just annoying because there's no sense of scale in this thing. And despite the filmmakers near constantly teasing that Walter is a great black belt in the making, he doesn't even get to fight a single guy. All of these elements mesh together to make a script that, while entertaining, if looked at in even a remotely analytical way, just results in a total mess of a movie. And I'll be the first to say, hey, big dumb goofy action flicks are fun, but if you come into this film immediately after the first one, that tonal and structural change is going to be a hell of a bumpy landing. The script was written by Max Storm and John Allen Nelson. Max previously wrote additional dialogue for the first Best of the Best movie, and here he returns as a full-blown screenplay writer. I'd argue that this was probably his biggest credit, and the script here was written in the middle of his writing career, his last credit being in 1998. As a newcomer to the series, John has 6 writing credits, mainly for action-adventure films, including Midnight Heat and American Yakuza. Really, he's more of an actor, with 56 credits to his name, including Baywatch, 24, and My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. If I'm being honest, I feel like the series has kind of lost something with this entry, with both Phillip Rhee and Paul Levine leaving the writing side of things. On directing duties, we see the return of Robert Radler, and fun fact, this was actually the first film he directed after the first Best of the Best. He literally took a couple of years away to do other things and then came right back to doing this film. On the direction front, it's bland. There isn't really much more I can say about it. When I can compare your movie to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 in terms of stylization, and TMNT 2 came out 2 years before this movie, something's gone very wrong. All the main Colosseum shots are bathed in blue light, and I honestly don't know why. There's no interesting or striking directional decisions in this thing. It really does feel like the director looked at a stack of some of the most successful action and fighting movies from the last 2 to 4 years, made a few notes on the bits he liked, and then just transplanted those styles directly into this movie. As a result, rather than it acting almost like a greatest hits of the martial arts genre at that time, it instead comes across as a film that very much feels done. I mean, the direction of the cast isn't awful, or at least it's no worse than the first film, but again, there's just kind of this feeling that there's a bit of a tonal shift on how things are being handled. And I'm not entirely won over by it. This feels less like a cinematic movie and more like something that's on its way to made-for-TV in places. Same goes for the cine, really. There's nothing in this that really makes me sit up and pay attention. It all feels like it's been copy-pasted from the best of action movies 1989 to 1992. And again, there's a slight whiff of the TV movie vibe about this. While the more grand set pieces kind of make up for the less than stellar consistency on shot types and compositions, there were at least a couple of sequences in this that just really felt underwhelming. They either need more shots, tighter editing, or both. And as a result, there are some sequences in this that just really feel like they drag. Performance-wise is probably where we see our biggest dynamic shift. Eric Roberts has gone from being a central figure in the plot to effectively just being set dressing. While I adored his performance in the first film, here, that same level of energy and fire just really isn't there. I honestly and quite sincerely think that with some very minor rewrites, he could have probably been taken out of this movie almost entirely, and the film would have still run exactly the same. In fact, the only times he really does stand out in this movie are his sequences with Meg Foster, and in all of those scenes he's usually being a jerk or manipulative, which really isn't a good place for your character who's supposed to be the voice of reason to be in. Phillip Rhee as Tommy is probably the best performer in this film, but even he doesn't really have a lot to do here. He's built up a bit more as our central protagonist for the film, and he does give a solid performance, but when the majority of your plot revolves around you going into hiding and training, there isn't really much scope for the more sweeping dramatic moments such as what was happening in the first film. I also have to say that Eden Gross as Walter here isn't great. I mean, he has his moments, and I know I have rules about child actors, but he really got the short end of the wedge on this one. In fact, given how the film is largely structured to be about him and his relationship with his dad, I'd say it was actually pretty poor. In fact, if I'm being picky, and why not at this point, that's actually an element of the film that annoyed me. The plot point gets no resolution. Walter in this film is effectively a MacGuffin. The implication based on how this film opens is that this is going to be some kind of coming-of-age story in which Walter begins the film failing his black belt training, but his father is supportive of how he maturely responds to that failure, and through the events that happen in the film, Walter eventually is able to overcome his drawbacks and achieve his black belt status. No. Instead, the film establishes that Walter has a supporting father and that he didn't pass his black belt, and then the script hard veers away from any kind of development narrative for Walter. Instead, he's relegated to pushing the plot along for Alex and Tommy largely through exposition. Or he's used as an excuse to get the characters to deviate away from the main plot point for 5 minutes or so. Whether it's to rescue him or protect him from trouble, or more ludicrously, in the third act they just drop him off at Alex's wife's house and then the film never really brings him up again. He literally gets forgotten about, and the film opens by implying he's going to be one of its most crucial aspects. The rest of the supporting cast just about hold it together. Ralph Moeller as Brackus is a fine villain of the week type. He's channeling Ivan Drago for certain parts of the runtime, but he's not offensively bad or anything, just a bit generic as the strong, silent type villain. Meg Foster gives a strong performance but is seriously sidelined in this thing. I'm genuinely of the belief that the only reason Alex has a wife in this movie is to find an excuse to get Walter out of the third act, and as a violently bad attempt to deflect any accusations of homosexual undertones between Tommy and Alex. She's fine, but she's wasted in this film. Equally, both Simon Rhee and Chris Penn are wasted as Travis and Han here. Han literally has no business being in this film. He was a Korean Olympian, and now suddenly he's based in the US and literally only turns up a handful of times. Once to say, "Sorry Travis got murdered, if you need me to go and do some murdering, let me know." And once later in the film when Alex approaches him about maybe doing some murdering. Much like Alex, he really could have just been removed from this film and nothing really would have been lost. As for Penn, well, I just feel like he's basically phoning it in here until he can get off the screen, and it's all a bit meh. Finally, the soundtrack, and even this fails to land in any kind of meaningful way. It's 90s dance-infused action music from beginning to end. It's not offensive, but again, it doesn't feel unique for this film. I could put this film's score in any mid to low budget action film between 1991 and 1997, and it really wouldn't feel out of place. It's a synth-driven, slightly rocky, royalty-free feeling free-for-all, and while I can't slam it because it is of quality, that doesn't mean it is quality. Best of the Best 2 was released on VHS in 1993 by EIV. It later got a DVD release in 2005 via 4Digital, before finally arriving on Blu-ray in 2017, also courtesy of 4Digital. I can't personally comment on any of the extras for the Blu-ray, if there are any, but I can say the picture quality is pretty decent. My version of the film came courtesy of a VHS haul I picked up a few years ago. This specific version was broadcast on the Sky Movie channel at some point in the mid-1990s. And strangely, it appears to be uncut, which is really odd because there's several scenes with nunchucks, something that the BBFC were seriously opposed to up until the late 90s. I have no idea how they managed to make it through the censors. Either way, it annoys me that Eric Roberts is the main image on the box art for the Blu-ray of this release when it clearly should be Phillip Rhee, but that's an argument for another time. I've been hard on this film because I feel the need to make it abundantly clear that it is a bit of a departure from the original movie in my opinion. But I equally want to make it clear that I don't hate this movie. In fact, I quite enjoyed it in a big, dumb action movie kind of way. It may be running everything on safe and vanilla for the most part in terms of being an action martial arts movie, but that doesn't mean there isn't fun to be had here. In spite of its flaws, this is a somewhat fun film that I think would be best enjoyed in a group setting. I don't think I can personally recommend it hand on heart, but I think that if you liked the first Best of the Best movie, you'd probably still get on with this one, just for slightly different reasons. What this has got me curious about now is where Best of the Best 3 goes. Will it continue down the action film lineage? Will Eric Roberts actually have a point in it? Will Walter get his black belt? Who knows? For me though, I think the next one will probably decide whether the franchise is a make or break for me. But that review's a little while away yet.